various ways can control most interest rates. He pushed interest rates very, very far down. And he kept them down until about 2005. So in that period, and a reinforcing factor was the fact that because of our huge budget deficit, well, our huge budget deficits were used to, were financed by countries such as China and Japan and Germany, which are very big exporting countries. They were happy to sell us goods cheap and in return buy Treasury securities and in effect flood the United States with money. Now, Greenspan could have kept interest rates up anyway, but the fact that he kept interest rates down not only increased bank lending, but also made it very easy to attract capital from abroad. So, so there was a big run-up in, so as I say, when interest rates are low, housing starts boom. But the housing stock is extremely durable, so that when there's a big surge in demand for houses, you do get more housing starts, but the entire housing stock cannot expand rapidly because it's so durable. So you have high prices. Whenever you have inelastic supply and a big increase in demand, you get high prices. As the prices go up, people observe rising prices, and they say to themselves, prices are rising, and the government is telling us that, well, it's rising because you're becoming wealthier and because there are demographic changes that are, and changes in land use laws and so on that are making it easier to develop, and therefore prices probably continue to rise. Well, if prices will continue to rise, houses become great investments. You know, if you borrow, in 2005, the average price of a house in the United States rose by 20%. If you borrowed, if you bought a house with a 100% mortgage, you know, in 2004, by 2005, the house is worth 20% more. You have almost a 20% equity. And then you can refinance your mortgage for a lower interest rate because you have equity. So it looked like a great deal to people. It was a gamble because no one knew how long it would last. But if the government tells you it's not a bubble, these are fundamental economic changes that are driving housing prices, then most people will believe that housing prices will continue to rise for a few years anyway, and then it'll be a great investment. The problem is, if you're, and as I say, houses are financed by debt. So as housing prices rise, and there's this, that means the demand for housing debt rises, means the banks become ever more invested in the housing industry. So when the bubble bursts, surprising people, not so much that it was a bubble, which many people suspected, although most disagreed, but the suddenness and the extent of the collapse of prices surprised people. And then the banking industry finds itself heavily over committed to housing. And so, as I say, banking is a risky business. If your major loans sour, you can go broke very quickly. And that's what happened. So now people say, you know, stupid people, they shouldn't have bought with a 100% mortgage. They should have known better. They were fooled. It was fraud by mortgage brokers. I'm sure there's some of that, but I don't think that's the major thing. I think for the most part, people knew they were taking a risk, but they were hopeful and to some extent confident that prices would continue to rise and it would be their entree into home ownership, which is highly valued by Americans.
It's not really a question, it's a comment, or a series of comments. So you don't even have to respond.
Okay. You can have the last word.
You get the last word. In any case, I'm Twice today I've been pleased. I was able to find some point of agreement with Chairman Greenspan, and I'm able to find a point of agreement with Judge Posner. I fully agree with you that the critique, certainly my critique, is a critique of modernity. And economics, for me, is the formalization of the assumptions of modernity. So we're on the same page in that. Your example of risk and uncertainty seems to me a good example of where the normative agenda has obscured good, positive economics. If we want to describe the world, I think possibly you and I agree that distinction between risk and uncertainty is essential. In economics, it's been blurred. The idea of subjective probability is precisely a device to blur that distinction. Yeah. Why do we have that notion of subjective probability? I would argue it's because it's the only way that we can salvage the normative program that's summarized in the two welfare theorems about the relationship between competitive markets and optimality. So I think it's a good example of the, if you want to put it that way, the normative tail wagging the positive dog, but in any case, good descriptive economics being obscured by the normative agenda. I fully agree with you about Keynes and the importance of confidence. I think we're certainly on the same track there. The only place where we're not is your response to this last question from my colleague here. I agree with a lot of what you said. It's what you left out. And that I never heard the word securitization play any role in this. And I think it is significant. And it did change the game. And it did make the consequences of this bubble much worse.
Yes, the point you made when you mentioned securitization is how it separated the origination of a mortgage from the ownership of a mortgage is very important, and it's one of the reasons that it is so difficult to modify mortgages. That the companies that are hired to service mortgages have no connection with the person who took out the mortgage. It's harder to deal with that, to negotiate with that person. So I think that's true. That problem of the separation between the borrower and the lender goes beyond securitization, because there are a lot of other ways in which debts get assigned to other creditors apart from the original creditor. I think that's important. I think securitization is a factor in the Depression, but I don't emphasize it as much as other people. First, because we had really the events leading up to the Great Depression of the 30s very similar to what happened now. That is a big credit binge in the 20s, connected with the invention of new methods of granting credit, such as installment buying, and also with the fact that the banks, disappointed that they were not allowed to buy stocks and thus speculate in the great stock market boom of the 20s, discovered they could do the same thing by lending money to people to buy stock on margin, and they'd lend people 90% of the price of a stock and go buy it, hoping that stock prices wouldn't fall by more than 10%, which, of course, they fell by 80%. So that was a tremendous blow. So when you have new methods of credit that expand credit, and these new methods, create new risks, then you can get into serious trouble. And to some extent, securitization did that, and also with the Japanese, credit binge, housing bubble burst, banks fail, depression, that preceded securitization. So I think securitization is a factor, but it's not the basic factor. I'd go so far as to say that if there hadn't been securitization, we would probably be very close to the situation we are. Thank you. Thank you, Judge.